High in the gray stone mountains under a frowning peak, a little spring bubbled out of a rupture in the stone. It was fed by shade-preserved snow in the summer, and now and then it died completely, and bare rock and algae were on its bottom. But nearly always it gushed out, cold and clean and lovely. And the times when the quick rains fell, it might become a freshet, send its column of white water crashing down the mountain cleft. But nearly always it was a lean little spring. It bubbled out into a pool, and then fell 100 feet to another pool. And this one, overflowing, dropped again, so that it continued down and down until it came to the rubble of the upland. And there it disappeared again. Now I want y'all to listen to this. This is a really fantastic explanation of what happens. There wasn't much left of it anyway, for every time it fell over a little escarpment, the thirsty air drank it, and it splashed from the pools to the dried vegetation. The animals from miles around came to drink from the little pools, and the wild sheep and the deer and the pumas and raccoons and the mice all came to drink. And the birds which spent the day in the brushland came at night to the little pools that were like steps in the mountain cleft. Beside this tiny stream, wherever enough earth collected for root hold, colonies of plants grew, wild grape and little palms, maidenhair fern, hibiscus, tall pampas grass with feathery rods raised above the spike leaves. And in the pool lived frogs and water skaters, and water worms crawled on the bottom of the pool. Now here we go. Everything that loved water came to these shallow places. The cats took their prey there, strewed feathers and lapped water through their bloody teeth. The little pools were places of life because of the water, and places of killing because of the water too. Somebody explain that to me. The little pools were places of life because of the water, but also places of killing because of the water.
Like bigger animals go there and kill the smaller animals.
That's right. That's right. So say a puma, it knows that the rabbit is going to go take a sip of that water. The rabbit doesn't have a choice. If it doesn't go there, it's going to be thirsty and die. So it goes down there to get a sip of the water, and the old puma jumps out and eats the rabbit. So it's places of life because of the water. If the rabbit doesn't go there, he's going to die. He might get him a sip and scurry off and go. But sometimes the old puma's going to get him. Place of life because of water, and place of killing because of water too. I always thought that was a cool sentence. The lowest step where the stream collected before it tumbled down 100 feet and disappeared into the rubbly desert was a little platform of stone and sand. Only a pencil of water fell into the pool, but it was enough to keep the pool full and to keep the ferns green, and the underhang of the cliff and wild grape climbed the stone mountain, and all manner of little plants found comfort here. The freshets had made a small sandy beach through which the pool flowed, and bright green watercress grew in the damp sand. The beach was cut and scarred and padded by the feet of animals that had come to drink and to hunt. The sun had passed over the stone mountains when Kino and Juana struggled up the steep broken slope and came at last to the water. From this step, they could look out over the sun-beaten desert to the blue gulf in the distance. They came utterly weary to the pool, and Juana slumped to her knees and first washed Coyotito's face, and then filled her bottle and gave him a drink. And the baby was weary and petulant, and he cried softly. And then he gurgled and clucked. Kino drank long and thirstily at the pool. For a moment, then he stretched out beside the water and relaxed all his muscles and watched Juana feeding the baby. Then he got to his feet and went to the edge of the step where the water slipped over. And he searched the distance carefully. His eyes set on a point, and he became rigid. Far down the slope, he could see the two trackers. They were little more than dots or scurrying ants, and behind them, a larger ant. So it says it looks like three ants. Two small ants, one big ant. What are these three ants?
The two people on foot and the one person on horse.
That's exactly right. Juana had turned to look at him, and she saw his back stiffen. How far? She asked quietly. They will be here by evening, said Kino. He looked up the long, steep chimney of the cleft where the water came down. We must go west, he said. His eyes searched the stone shoulder behind the cleft. And 30 feet up on the gray shoulder, he saw a series of little erosion caves. He slipped off his sandals and clambered up to them. gripping the bare stone with his toes, and he looked into the shallow caves that were only a few feet deep, wind-hollowed scoops, but they sloped slightly downward and back. Kino crawled into the largest one and lay down, and knew that he could not be seen from the outside. Quickly, he went back to Juana. "You must go up there. Perhaps they will not find us up there." So he finds like these small caves, just says scooped in a little bit, not like a deep cave, but just scooped in a few feet where you could kind of, hunker down and hide. He says, "It's where you need to go." Without question, she filled her bottle to the top. And then Kino helped her up to the shallow cave and brought up the packages of food and passed them to her. And Juana sat in the cave entrance and watched him. She saw that he did not try to erase the tracks in the sand. Instead, he climbed up the brush cliff beside the water, clawing and tearing at the ferns and wild grape as he went. And when he had climbed again 100 feet to the next branch, he came down again. He looked carefully at the smooth rock shoulder toward the cave to see if there was no trace of passage. And last he climbed up and crept into the cave beside Juana. "When they go up," he said, "we will slip away down to the lowlands again. I am afraid only that the baby may cry. You must see that he does not cry." "He will not cry," she said. She raised the baby's face to her own and looked into his eyes, and he stared solemnly back at her. "He knows," said Juana. So Kino says, "This is what we're going to do." He says, y'all get in this cave real quick. He says, "I'm going to go up past the cave and, put a footprint here and break a stick there, and they're going to follow the tracks up past the cave. And when we see them go by, we're going to scurry down the mountain." Not a bad plan. He says, "You got one thing you've got to do, Juana. You make sure Coyotito is quiet." And she says, he's not going to make any noise. He knows he's got to be quiet. He's got it. Now we need to talk about something. In the first chapter, I told y'all to remember the name Coyotito. What does Coyotito mean?
Little coyote.
Little coyote. That's right. Good, guys. Good. Y'all were listening. All right. Let's keep on flapping. Now Kino lay in the cave entrance, his chin braced on his crossed arms, and he watched the blue shadow of the mountain move out across the brushy desert below until it reached the gulf, and the long twilight of the shadow was over the land. The trackers were long in coming, as though they had trouble with the trail Kino had left. It was dusk when they came at last to the little pool, and all three were on foot now, for a horse could not climb the last steep slope. From above, they were thin figures in the evening. The two trackers scurried about on the little beach, and they saw Kino's progress up the cliff before they drank. The man with the rifle sat down, rested himself, and the tracker squatted near him. And in the evening, the points of their cigarettes glowed and receded. And then Kino could see that they were eating, and the soft murmur of their voices came to him. The darkness fell, deep and black in the mountain cleft. The animals that used the pool came near and smelled men there and drifted away again into the darkness. He heard a murmur behind him. Juana was whispering, "Coyotito." She was begging him to be quiet. Kino heard the baby whimper, and he knew from the muffled sounds that Juana had covered his head with her shawl. Down on the beach, a match flared, and in its momentary light, Kino saw that two of the men were sleeping, curled up like dogs, while the third watched. He saw the glint of the rifle in the match light, and the match died. But it left a picture on Kino's eyes. He could see it, just how each man was, two sleeping, curled up, and the third squatting in the sand with the rifle between his knees. Think about that. So the three trackers have basically set up camp for the night, and they're not that far from Kino and Juana. And Kino kind of snuck out of the cave, and he's kind of watching them, and they're smoking. You shouldn't smoke; it's gonna kill you. All right. And anyway, one of them lights up his match to light his cig. Okay. Two of them are sleeping. Then you've basically got the man out on watch with the rifle. He's got to do something. I guess he's bored, so he's smoking. But when he lights up that match, Kino can kind of see, okay, I got two of them over here lying down. I got this guy kind of kicked back with the gun. So he knows how they're positioned. And then obviously when the match goes out, it becomes dark again, but it gives him an idea. Kino moved slowly back into the cave. Juana's eyes were two sparks reflecting a low star. Kino crawled quietly close to her, and he put his lips near to her cheek. "There is a way," he said,
but they will kill you. If I get first to the one with the rifle, Kino said, I must get to him first. Then I will be all right. 2 are sleeping. Her hand crept out from under her shawl and gripped his arm. They will see your white clothes in the starlight. No, he said, and I must go before moonrise. Kino searched for a soft word and then gave it up. If they kill me, he said, lie quietly. When they are gone away, go to Loretto. Her hand shook a little, holding his wrist. There's no choice, he said. It is the only way. They will find us in the morning. Her voice trembled a little. Go with God, she said. He peered closely at her, and he could see her large eyes. His hand fumbled out, and he found the baby, and for a moment his palm lay on Cleotito's head. And then Kino raised his hand and touched Juana's cheek. She held her breath. Against the sky in the cave entrance, Juana could see that Kino was taking off his white clothes, for dirty and ragged though they were, they would show up against the dark night. His own brown skin was a better protection for him. And then she saw how he hooked his amulet neck string about the horn handle of his great knife, so that it hung down in front of him and left both hands free. He did not come back to her. For a moment, his body was black in the cave entrance, crouched and silent, and then he was gone. So Kino, he's got his plan. He had to take off his clothes because his clothes were white, and he was afraid he would be seen, and he's dark-skinned, okay? So his own skin is better camouflage than his clothes, even though it says his clothes are dirty. Let's keep going. Juana moved to the entrance and looked out. She peered like an owl from the hole in the mountain, and the baby slept under the blanket on her back. His face turned sideways against her neck and shoulder. She could feel his warm breath against her skin. And Juana whispered her combination of magic and prayer, her Hail Marys and her ancient intercession against the black unhuman things. The night seemed a little less dark when she looked out. And to the east, there was a lightning in the sky, down near the horizon where the moon would show. And looking down, she could see the cigarette of the man on watch. Kino edged like a slow lizard down the smooth rock shoulder. He had turned his neck string so that the great knife hung from his back and it would not clash against the stone. He spread his fingers, gripped the mountain, and his bare toes found support through contact, and even his chest lay against the stone so that he would not slip. For any sound, a rolling pebble or a sigh, a little slip of flesh on rock would rouse the watchers below. Any sound that was not germane to the night would make them alert. But the night was not silent. The little tree frogs that lived near the stream twittered like birds, and the high metallic ring of the cicadas filled the mountain cleft. Kino's own music was in his head, the music of the enemy, low, pulsing, nearly asleep, but the song of the family had become as fierce and sharp and feline as the snarl of a female puma. The family song was alive now and driving him down on the dark enemy. The harsh cicada seemed to take up its melody, and the twittering tree frogs called little phrases of it. Kino crept silently as a shadow down the smooth mountain face. One bare foot moved a few inches, and the toes touched the stone and gripped. The other a few inches, then the palm of one hand a little downward, and then the other hand, until his whole body, without seeming to move, had moved. Kino's mouth was open so that even his breath would make no sound, for he knew that he was not invisible. If the watcher, sensing movement, looked at the dark place against the stone, which was his body, he could see him. Kino must move so slowly he would not draw the watcher's eyes. It took him a long time to reach the bottom, to crouch behind the little dwarf palm. His heart thundered in his chest, and his hands and face were wet with sweat. He crouched and took great, long, slow breaths to calm himself. Only 20 feet. Get this. Guys, each of these is a foot. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. That's how close he is to these guys right now. That's how close he is. Only 20 feet separated him from the enemy now, and he tried to remember the ground between. Was there any stone which might trip him in his rush? He kneaded his legs against cramp and found that his muscles were jerking after their long tension. And then he looked apprehensively to the east. The moon would rise in a few moments now, and he must attack before it rose. He could see the outline of the watcher but the sleeping men were below his vision. It was the watcher Kino must find quickly and without hesitation. Silently, he drew the amulet string over his shoulder, loosened the loop from the horn handle of his great knife. He was too late, for as he rose from his crouch, the silver edge of the moon slipped over the eastern horizon and Kino sank back behind his bush. So now the moon's out, there's light. Poor old Kino. Guy has no luck, does he? It was an old and ragged moon, but it threw hard light, hard shadow into the mountain cleft. And now Kino could see the seated figure of the watcher on the little beach beside the pool. The watcher gazed full at the moon, then he lighted another cigarette, and the match illumined his dark face for a moment. There could be no waiting now. When the watcher turned his head, Kino must leap. His legs were as tight as wound springs. And then from above came a little murmuring cry. The watcher turned his head to listen, and then he stood up, and one of the sleepers stirred on the ground and awakened and asked quietly, "What is it?" "I don't know," said the watcher. It sounded like a cry, almost like a human, like a baby. The man who had been sleeping said, "You can't tell. Some coyote with a litter. I've heard a coyote pup cry like a baby." The sweat rolled in drops down Kino's forehead and fell into his eyes and burned them. The little cry came again, and the watcher looked up the side of the hill to the dark cave. "Coyote, maybe," he said. And Kino heard the harsh click as he cocked the rifle. "If it's a coyote, this'll stop it," the watcher said as he raised the gun. Kino was in mid-leap when the gun crashed and the barrel flash made a picture on his eyes. The great knife swung and crunched hollowly. It bit through neck, deep in the chest, and Kino was a terrible machine now. He grasped the rifle, even as he wrenched free his knife. His strength and his movement and his speed were a machine. He whirled and struck the head of the seated man like a melon. The third man scrabbled away like a crab, slipped into the pool, and then he began to climb frantically, to climb up the cliff where the water penciled down. His eyes and feet thrust in the tangle of the wild grapevine, and he whimpered and gibbered as he tried to get up. But Kino had become as cold and deadly as steel. Deliberately, he threw the lever of the rifle. Then he raised the gun and aimed, and deliberately he fired. He saw his enemy tumble backward into the pool. Kino strode in the water. In the moonlight, he could see the frantic, frightened eyes. And Kino aimed and fired between the eyes. And then Kino stood uncertainly. Something was wrong. Some signal was trying to get through to his brain. Tree frogs and cicadas were silent now. And then Kino's brain cleared from its red concentration, and he knew the sound. The keening, moaning, rising, hysterical cry from the little cave in the side of the stone mountain. The cry of death.
She got shot.
Who got shot?
Warner. Tito.
First of all, did Kino at least kill all the trackers?
That one of them ran away.
No. It says he shot him when he was trying to get away. So we did get them all. Everyone in La Paz remembers the return of the family. There may be some old ones who saw it, but those whose fathers and whose grandfathers told it then remember it nevertheless. It is an event that happened to everyone. It was late in the golden afternoon when the first little boys ran hysterically in the town and spread the word that Kino and Juana were coming back, and everyone hurried to see them. The sun was settling toward the western mountains, and the shadows on the ground were long, and perhaps that was what left the deep impression on those who saw them. The two came from the rutted country, get this, the two came from the rutted country road into the city, and they were not walking in single file, Kino ahead and Juana behind as usual, but side by side. Let's stop there. It says, usually when Kino and Juana go somewhere, Kino's in front and Juana walks behind him. So when Kino walks in front and Juana walks behind him, what does that symbolize about Kino?
He's the leader.
He's the leader. But now they're not walking him in front and her behind. They're walking side by side. What does that symbolize?
They both the leaders, I guess.
They're both leaders. What?
They got married.
Nope.
No,
Come on, y'all. It's a popular word. It starts with an E. Say it. Equality. He's no longer the leader. She is now on the same level as him. Keep going. The sun was behind them, and their long shadows stalked ahead, and they seemed to carry 2 towers of darkness with them. Kino had a rifle across his arm, and Juana carried her shawl like a sack over her shoulder. Kino got his rifle. But it says her shawl was being carried like a sack over her shoulder. And in it was a small, limp, heavy bundle. The shawl was crusted with dried blood, and the bundle swayed a little as she walked. Her face was hard and lined with leathery fatigue, and with the tightness with which she fought fatigue, and her wide eyes stared inward on herself. She was as remote and as removed as heaven. Kino's lips were thin, his jaws were tight. People say that he carried fear with him, that he was as dangerous as a rising storm. The people say that the two seemed to be removed from human experience, that they had gone through pain and had come out on the other side, that there was almost a magical protection about them. Those people who had rushed to see them crowded back and let them pass and did not speak to them. Kino and Juana walked through the city as though it were not there. Their eyes glanced neither right nor left, nor up nor down, but stared only straight ahead. Their legs moved a little jerkily like well-made wooden dolls, and they carried pillars of black fear about them. And as they walked through the stone and plaster city, brokers peered at them from barred windows, and servants put one eye to a slitted gate, and mothers turned the faces of their youngest children inward against their skirts. Kino and Juana strode side by side through the stone and plaster city and down among the brush houses. And the neighbors stood back and let them pass. Juan Tomas raised his hand in greeting, did not say the greeting, and left his hand in the air for a moment, uncertainly. In Kino's ears, the song of the family was as fierce as a cry. He was immune and terrible, and his song had become a battle cry. They trudged past the square where their house had been without even looking at it. They cleared the brush that edged the beach and picked their way down the shore toward the water. And they did not look toward Kino's broken canoe. And when they came to the water's edge, they stopped and stared out over the gulf. And then Kino laid the rifle down, and he dug among his clothes. Then he held the great pearl in his hand. He looked into its surface. It was gray and ulcerous. Does the pearl seem beautiful to him anymore? It used to be white and shiny and shimmering, right? Now it's gray and ulcerous. Evil faces peered from it into his eyes, and he saw the light of burning. And in the surface of the pearl, he saw the frantic eyes of the man in the pool. And in the surface of the pearl, he saw Coyotito lying in the little cave with the top of his head shot away. And the pearl was ugly. It was gray like a malignant growth. Kino heard the music of the pearl, distorted and insane. Kino's hand shook a little, and he turned slowly to Juana, and he held out the pearl to her. She stood beside him, still holding her dead bundle over her shoulder. She looked at the pearl in his hand for a moment, and then she looked into Kino's eyes and said softly, "No, you." And let's stop. So Kino, they've walked up to the edge of the beach, edge of the water, and he's put the pearl out to her. What is he trying to get her to do? Throw it back. And she says, "No. You do it." Why?
Because he the one who need to get rid of it.
Say that again.
He the one who need to get rid of it.
He is the one that needs to get rid of it, but that's not the only reason.
And he's the one.
The evil affected him more than it did
That's
Juana.
right. He was the one that was like under the hypnotism. She was kind of like, "No, I've been telling you. You do it, man. I've told you this. I've been telling you this." He was under the hypnotism. And Kino drew back his arm and flung the pearl with all his might. Kino and Juana watched it go, winking and glimmering under the setting sun. They saw a little splash in the distance, and they stood side by side watching the place for a long time. And the pearl settled in the lovely green water and dropped toward the bottom. The waving branches of the algae called to it and beckoned to it. The lights on its surface were green and lovely. It settled down to the sand bottom among the fern-like plants. Above, the surface of the water was a green mirror, and the pearl lay on the floor of the sea. A crab scampering over the bottom raised a little cloud of sand, and when it settled, the pearl was gone, and the music of the pearl drifted to a whisper and disappeared.